Did you know that according to mainstream archaeology, the ancient Celts who inhabited Iron Age Britain were considered a pre-literate warrior culture? Tribes who painted their bodies blue, fought with iron swords, and left behind no written records. No books, no inscriptions, no language beyond what was borrowed from Rome. But in 1857, dredgers working the River Thames in London pulled something from the muddy riverbed that shattered that assumption entirely. A bronze shield so perfectly crafted, so impossibly ornate, that it looked less like a weapon and more like a transmission from another world. These are 4 discoveries that don't just confuse scientists, they threaten to rewrite history itself. First, the Battersea Shield. In the autumn of 1857, workers dredging the bed of the River Thames near Battersea Bridge in London dragged something unexpected from the silt. A bronze shield, oval in shape, measuring just over 2.5 feet long. At first glance, it seemed like a remarkable but explainable find. Britain's ancient Celts were known metalworkers after all. Bronze weapons had been turning up in the Thames for decades. But the moment anyone looked closely, that explanation dissolved completely. The shield's surface was divided into 3 circular panels, each one decorated with a swirling, interlocking design of such mathematical precision that it seemed almost impossible to execute by hand. The roundels, the spirals, the perfectly balanced symmetry, all of it demanded tools and techniques that no one had ever attributed to Iron Age Britain. And embedded at precise intervals across the surface were 27 pieces of red glass, each one set into its mount with the accuracy of a jeweler working under magnification. Red glass, not gemstones, not enamel. Manufactured glass, tinted to a specific shade of crimson, and shaped to fit its housing exactly. The process required to produce glass of that quality, that color in that era, pointed toward a level of chemical and thermal knowledge that the ancient Celts were simply not supposed to possess. Then researchers noticed something else. The shield had never been used in battle. There wasn't a single dent, scratch, or stress mark anywhere on its surface. A bronze shield with no evidence of combat, dredged from the bed of a river. The obvious implication was that it had been placed there deliberately, an offering, perhaps to the river itself, or to some god whose name no one can any longer speak. But that raised more questions than it answered. Because the craftsmanship required to produce this object went far beyond anything that should have been possible in the British Isles around 350 BCE, the date most experts have assigned to it. The techniques on display, the red glass inlay, the repoussé bronze work, the geometric precision, they suggest a level of artistic and technical sophistication that archaeologists typically associate with cultures far more advanced and far more connected to the wider ancient world. Who taught the people of Iron Age Britain to do this? Where did they learn to make glass? How did they achieve the kind of geometric precision that would challenge a modern craftsman working with contemporary tools? The Battersea Shield now sits in the British Museum, one of the most celebrated objects in its entire collection. And yet the questions it raises remain almost entirely unaddressed. It is treated as a marvel of Celtic artistry without anyone ever fully explaining how Celtic artistry reached that level, or why, if they could produce objects this extraordinary, no other objects of comparable quality have ever been found. It was pulled from the Thames, offered to the water, and somehow survived 2,000 years of burial in the silt. Whatever it was made to commemorate, whatever power it was meant to honor, it speaks of a culture far more sophisticated than the history books have ever been willing to admit. Second, the Trundholm Sun Chariot. In 1902, a farmer plowing a bog field on the island of Zealand in Denmark struck something hard beneath the surface. He initially dismissed it, assuming his plow had caught a tree root or a buried stone. But when he looked back, he saw metal glinting in the dark soil. What he pulled from the earth that morning had been lying there for more than 3,000 years. It was a horse, cast in bronze, about a foot long, standing on 6 small bronze wheels, and pulling behind it a large disc also mounted on wheels. The disc was coated on one side with gold leaf, decorated with thousands of tiny spirals, arranged in concentric circles of such regularity that counting them becomes almost hypnotic. The other side of the disc was plain bronze. The object became known as the Trundholm Sun Chariot, and from the moment archaeologists began examining it, its strangeness only deepened. The golden spirals on the disc were not random decoration. Analysis revealed that they were arranged in patterns corresponding to astronomical cycles. The number of spirals, the arrangement of the concentric bands, the proportions of the disc itself, all of it pointed toward a sophisticated understanding of the movement of celestial bodies. The people who made this object were not simply honoring the sun as a vague concept of warmth and life. They were tracking it, measuring it, encoding its behavior in bronze and gold. But that was only the beginning. The two sides of the disc, one gold and one plain bronze, are widely interpreted as representing day and night. The chariot would have been pulled in one direction during daylight, the gold face forward, and in the opposite direction after sunset, the bronze face leading. This implied a cosmological model, a working theory of how the universe was organized, embedded into a physical object, and pulled across ritual space to enact the movement of the heavens. Whoever built the Trundholm Sun Chariot understood astronomy. They understood metallurgy. They understood the geometry required to produce a disc this precisely circular using the tools of the Nordic Bronze Age. And they understood symbolic representation at a level that suggested not folk religion or superstition, but a systematic, codified body of knowledge being maintained and transmitted by specialists. The problem is that mainstream archaeology describes the people of Bronze Age Scandinavia as relatively simple tribal societies. Capable metalworkers? Yes. Skilled farmers and sailors? Certainly. But not astronomers, not cosmologists, not the kind of culture that produces objects encoding the movement of celestial bodies with mathematical precision. The Trundholm Sun Chariot doesn't fit that description. It points towards something more organized, more intellectually sophisticated, more connected to a wider world of astronomical knowledge than the official history of Northern Europe has ever acknowledged. It was found in a bog, which in the Bronze Age was considered a sacred liminal space, a boundary between the world of the living and whatever lay beneath. Someone carried this extraordinary object to that place and buried it. Not because it was broken or worthless, because it was sacred beyond measure. 3,000 years later, a Danish farmer's plow found it again, and we still don't fully understand what it was trying to tell us. Third, the Gundestrup Cauldron. In 1891, peat cutters working a bog in Jutland, Denmark, made a discovery that would puzzle scholars for more than a century. Buried beneath the surface, carefully dismantled, its panels laid flat and arranged in a circle, was a large silver cauldron unlike anything ever found in Northern Europe. The Gundestrup Cauldron was nearly 3 feet in diameter. It was made of silver, almost pure, hammered into panels and decorated with imagery of extraordinary complexity. Gods with antlers, elephants, soldiers marching in formation, a giant figure gripping smaller humans by the ankles and plunging them headfirst into a vessel, serpents with ram's horns, a great wheel, a procession of animals and mythological figures that seemed to draw from traditions spanning half the ancient world. That last point was what made it truly baffling, because the imagery on the Gundestrup Cauldron did not belong to Northern Europe. The antlered god, known as Cernunnos, was Celtic, but the elephants were distinctly Eastern. The warrior figures wore Celtic torques around their necks but carried Eastern-style weapons. The artistic technique, high-relief repoussé silverwork of extraordinary skill, was consistent with metalworking traditions from Thrace, in what is now Bulgaria and Romania, thousands of miles from the Danish bog where the cauldron was found. How did a Thracian-style silver cauldron decorated with Celtic, Eastern, and Mediterranean imagery end up buried in a bog in Jutland? The question has never been satisfactorily answered. Some researchers argue that Thracian craftsmen were commissioned by Celtic patrons, producing an object to Celtic specifications, but using their own technical traditions. Others suggest that the cauldron was captured in war or traded across vast distances, or that it was the work of a now-forgotten school of metalworkers who synthesized traditions from across the ancient world. But none of those explanations address what the imagery actually means. The scenes depicted on the panels are too specific, too layered, too internally consistent to be decorative accident. They describe something, a mythology, a ritual, a cosmological system that drew on sources from Celtic Britain, from the Eastern Mediterranean, from the steppes of Central Asia, and from traditions no one has yet identified. The panel showing the giant figure plunging soldiers into a cauldron is especially disturbing. It has been interpreted as a scene of ritual sacrifice, of resurrection, of initiation into death and rebirth. Whatever it depicts, it is not casual imagery. It is the record of a belief system sophisticated enough to encode itself into silver, complex enough to require a master craftsman months of labor to execute, and important enough that someone eventually dismantled it with great care and committed it to the sacred dark of a bog. The Gundestrup Cauldron is now in the National Museum of Denmark. Its imagery has been analyzed, debated, and theorized over for more than 100 years. Every study confirms the same thing. This object should not exist. It represents a convergence of cultures and knowledge traditions that mainstream history says had no reason to intersect, in a place and time that makes no conventional sense. It remains like the bog that preserved it, something caught between worlds. Fourth, the Phaistos disc. In 1908, Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier was excavating the ruins of the Minoan palace of Phaistos on the island of Crete when he discovered something in a small room off a main corridor that would consume the next century of scholarship and still yield no definitive answer. It was a disc of fired clay about 6.5 inches across, and on both sides of it were symbols. Stamped into the clay in a spiral pattern, starting from the outer edge and working inward, were 241 individual signs organized into 61 groups, each group separated by a line. The symbols depicted recognizable shapes: a head with a feathered headdress, a fish, a bee, a bird, a shield, a running man, a flower, a hand. 45 distinct signs in total, repeating in varying combinations across both faces of the disc. The most astonishing thing about the Phaistos disc was not the symbols themselves, it was how they were made. Each symbol had been pressed into the wet clay using a separate stamp, a pre-formed tool cut to produce a specific sign. This was not hand drawing, this was not scratching, this was printing. Standardized, repeatable impression printing, using a set of dedicated stamps, applied to a document that was then fired to preserve it permanently. The technology implied by that process was extraordinary. To produce 45 separate stamps, each one precisely carved to produce a legible, consistent sign, required planning, investment, and a reason. You don't commission a set of 45 stamps to write one document. You commission them because you intend to produce many documents, frequently using the same standardized symbols, which meant the Phaistos disc was not unique. It was a survivor. If stamps were made, other discs were made, but no other disc has ever been found. No other example of this writing system has ever been identified anywhere in the world. The symbols themselves have never been decoded. Over 100 proposed translations exist, ranging from a hymn to a goddess, to a military roster, to an astronomical calendar, to a board game. None has achieved scholarly consensus. The language encoded in the disc remains completely unknown. It matches no other writing system from the ancient Mediterranean world, including Minoan Linear A, which was being used in Crete at the same time, and is itself still largely undeciphered. And then there is the question of origin. Researchers examining the symbols noted that one recurring image, the feathered headdress figure, closely resembled depictions of Anatolian peoples found in Egyptian records. Several of the other symbols seem to carry echoes of signs from as far away as Cyprus and the Levant. The disc's style of organization, the spiral arrangement, the grouped sign clusters, had no precedent in Minoan culture or anywhere else in the Bronze Age Aegean. It was as if someone arrived in Crete around 1700 BCE, carrying a fully formed writing and printing technology that no one in the region had ever seen before. Used it to produce a document of unknown purpose in an unknown language, and then vanished entirely, leaving not a single other trace. The Phaistos disc is now kept in the Heraklion Archaeological Museum in Crete. It is displayed behind glass, photographed millions of times, studied by linguists, cryptographers, and archaeologists. It is perhaps the most analyzed small object in human history. And after more than 100 years of scrutiny, we still cannot read it, cannot place it within any known cultural tradition, and cannot explain why the technology that produced it appears nowhere else in the ancient world. Somewhere in the ruins of Phaistos, whoever left it behind knew exactly what it said. That knowledge has not survived. Only the disc remains, spinning its silent spiral of signs into a silence that, so far, nothing and no one has been able to break. These four objects share something that goes beyond mere mystery. Each one exists outside the story we have built for ourselves about human history. Each one appears in the wrong place, made with the wrong knowledge, pointing toward civilizations more sophisticated, more connected, and more ancient than we have ever been prepared to acknowledge. The Battersea Shield asks us how Iron Age Britain produced a level of artistry that shouldn't have existed there. The Trundholm Sun Chariot asks us how Bronze Age Scandinavia encoded astronomy into bronze and gold. The Gundestrup Cauldron asks us what forgotten culture could have synthesized the entire ancient world into a single object of silver. And the Phaistos disc asks us who arrived in Crete with a printing technology 3,000 years before Gutenberg, wrote something in an unknown language, and then simply disappeared. Maybe one day new excavations will uncover the missing pieces. Maybe technologies not yet invented will finally decode what the Phaistos disc is saying, or reveal the full story behind the Gundestrup Cauldron's impossible imagery. Or maybe these objects are not waiting to be explained at all. Maybe they're waiting to be believed. That the past was longer, stranger, and far more extraordinary than anything we have yet been willing to write down.